Welcome to Construction Trailblazers, the podcast that gets real about leading people, managing projects, and simplifying growth. I'm Samantha C Prestidge, and I work with construction and trade leaders who need to untangle back office chaos so you can have less firefighting and more traction. You can catch our past episodes at constructiontrailblazers.com and find practical strategies for building a business that runs smoother. All right, today's guest is Shayne Patterson. He's the co-founder of Jengai, a construction tech company on a mission to give subcontractors the powerful, practical tools they've always been overlooked for. After starting his career in investment banking and launching a successful fintech startup, Shayne then turned his attention to one of the toughest, most underserved corners of the industry, subcontractors, where outdated spreadsheets and slow bid processes hold companies back. Today, Jengai is helping contractors win more work, close bids faster, and scale smarter with a vision to become the Procore for subcontractors. His passion is tackling hard problems that transform everyday business challenges into competitive advantages. All right, Shayne, hi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Samantha, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I am so excited for this episode and for really getting curious into your story because it's quite fascinating. I think if someone were just to look you up on LinkedIn or look at your overall career trajectory, they'd be like, wait, what did they? What did what? Right? So you've gone from Wall Street to like typical business brick and mortar, right? Or at least fintech, and now you're focused on tech for subcontractors. So take us through your journey. How did you end up here?
The fintech startup that I started with my brother was very interesting because at the time, cloud wasn't a big thing. It was just emerging in 2013. So the problem was very appealing to me, which is part of it. I really wanted to work with my brother. The problem space didn't seem that interesting on the face of it, but getting into cloud technologies was very interesting for me. So when we were looking to sell, it was called ERP Maestro. When we were looking to sell ERP Maestro, I was trying to figure out what my next step was going to be. Was I going to go back to banking? Was I going to join Google? And I've always been drawn to hard problems. You mentioned it earlier. And a friend of mine had a stone and tile subcontracting business in New York City. And he was very excited about getting some tech into that particular problem space. So I went round to his office and he showed me the whole takeoff process and how they prepare proposals. And Samantha, I walked out of there thinking, this guy has no idea what he's doing. I couldn't believe that it was 2018. I couldn't believe in 2018, they were literally tracing the outlines of drawings so that they can get the material quantities so that they could generate proposals to win the work. Couldn't believe that was happening. So did a bit of research. And at the time, I don't know if you remember those videos of the squishy balls, of the robotic hands picking up the squishy balls. Early days AI, there were a lot of videos on the internet about how it's evolving and developing. And I thought, listen, if a robotic arm can pick up a squishy ball, then I can start to use AI to solve this problem, and jumped in head and shoulders and have been working on this particular problem ever since then. So a little bit of a circuitous route, but from a tech perspective, I mentioned that I like tough problems. Honestly, I didn't realize how tough this particular problem was going to be, but it's been super, super enjoyable. And what's very exciting is how I feel like we're getting to this inflection point where technology is really going to start to have a big impact on the construction sector. So very exciting space to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do see more and more construction companies leaning into technology as compared to even just 2 years ago. Even just 2 years ago, I had similar feelings that you did of going into a company and being like, wow, I had to have some respect. Like millions and millions and millions of dollars, great company. I have experienced some success, but at the same time, I'm like, how did you experience this success with these processes? And I do think even for myself, like, I think even for my own company, I sometimes really struggle to find a piece of technology that actually does fit my needs. And there are moments where I'm a little old school. I hope people don't come at me for saying this, but I use spreadsheets for some things because if I were to try to use a piece of technology or a piece of software, it would actually make my life a lot harder and not easier. And so sometimes when a spreadsheet works, you just got to do it, you know? But give me a little bit more insight into like why specifically focus on subcontractors. I know you've got a friend that was in the trades, but most tech companies go after GCs because there's more
Right.
money there. And like you said, it's a really tough problem to solve. So, what made you say, okay, we are going to solve this problem. We're going to stick with it even when it's tough? And what are some of the tough things that have come up?
Well, as I honestly, prior to my friend's name's Eunice, prior to meeting Eunice, I didn't even know what a subcontractor was. I knew not very much about construction. But once I began to understand how many subcontractors there were, once I started to understand building is done by subcontractors, a GC makes sure that an architect visualizes or puts down on paper the vision of the developer. A GC makes sure that the construction happens to spec, the quality is good and it's one person to shout at. But subcontractors do the actual building. And what I realized looking at the systems that were available was there were no real systems to support this specific problem space. So you've got a sector that essentially all of its work comes from proposals. And the inception point for all of those proposals are big 50-page, 100-page, 200-page, 1,000-page architectural plans. And they have no real product to support them, no technology to support them. We sell to companies generally once they've passed the $5 million mark. That's our sweet spot, which means that they've thought a lot about processes and they've built technologies if they could. So there wasn't a technology that helped with this very important function, the sales function. There is technology that helps them draw out the like online. Honestly, I think it came out maybe 10 years ago. Prior to that, it was pen and paper, literally measuring a plan on pen and paper. And then it was on-screen tracing. But that was the state of the art for this space. So you've got this big sector that really needs a way to turn around and accurately price these proposals, doesn't have a lot of support, and with the evolution of AI. So I guess if I was to summarize it into a couple of small points, it would be it's a huge underserved market, and the technology is getting to a point where it can actually make a difference for them. So that was very exciting. And part of the reason why, in my opinion, why there's no technology that actually supports them right now is because it's so hard. This particular problem, so the problem that I don't know if I did a good job of describing what it is, but essentially a subcontractor will get a set of architectural plans, and let's say they're doing the flooring. They will go through those plans and they'll look for every single reference to flooring. They'll measure out the floors, and that's how they prepare their proposals. So you have this problem that is embarrassingly easy for an expert human to solve, but because in architectural plans, there's an 80% standardization, but the 20% is what gets you. So you have this problem that's very easy for an expert human to solve. It takes years to get good at it, but once they're good at it, they're very good at it. It's their one thing that they do. And because of the non-standardization, it's a very hard technology problem. So you really have to spend a lot of money to actually move the needle. So big markets, underserved, not because they're not tech savvy, not because they don't want tech, but because you've got this very difficult business that where you only survive if you're careful with how you spend. Your needs are very extensive, and you've built process around, people process, and you built some automation to support your needs, but you're only going to shift if the technology really moves the needle. And up until now, not a lot of technology has been able to move the needle significantly on the productivity side.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things that you said there that I really appreciate. I think one of the important things was that people that are resistant to adapting or adopting technology, it's not because they're not tech savvy, but it's because the tech isn't really making their lives easier. And that is a really hard problem to solve. And I experience the same thing of, there are times where I feel like, am I behind with AI agents and AI workflows and all these things? And it's like, no, because actually those things are can be quite complicated to build, and they would only solve like a small fraction of the process rather than really solving the issue at large. So with that, okay, so let's step back and really understand what is Jengai trying to accomplish, because we hinted at the beginning that, hey, your big vision is to be the Procore for subcontractors. And I have given a lot of hate to Procore, rightly so. I think that it's not a great platform. They just have some really great marketing behind them. And luckily, a few other people have hopped on that bandwagon with me on LinkedIn in the past few months, so I don't feel alone in my opinion there. But putting all the crappy stuff to the side about Procore, really what is the vision for Jengai, and like what are the phases that you're starting with to then become the Procore for subcontractors?
So I think what Procore did really well was they serviced their customer very well. And their customer is the general contractor. So the subcontractor has no platform like Procore. And if you think about what do you need to be a successful construction company, one, you need a sales function that works extremely well. So the core tenet is you need an ability to push out accurate proposals quickly. That is super important. Two, your salespeople need to actually sell. So one of the challenges, what's ended up happening in construction is because accurate proposals is so important, your salespeople end up spending all of their time preparing accurate proposals. They're pricing it properly. They're making sure it was taken off properly. You've built process around making sure that you get good proposals. And the reason is proposal is risky. That proposal can put you out of business if you don't get it right. Most companies, no matter how big they are 3 bad projects away from bankruptcy. So it's a very risky process. So in my view, construction companies need a technology platform that allows them to build high quality proposals quickly. I think that on the subcontracting side, there's a lot of fragmentation. There are very few large subcontracting businesses. When I say large, at ERP Maestro, manufacturing was our customer at my previous startup. And we would start becoming valuable to a company once they hit $2 billion and upwards. That was our customer base. In construction, when you get to 10, 15 million, that's the middle of the bell curve. And then you get some companies that start to grow. And as they grow, it becomes more risky. And then they go bankrupt. So I think subcontractors need a system that allows them to grow large. They need a system that can de-risk being in the subcontracting game. So de-risk by allowing you to prepare proposals quickly, allowing your accurate proposals quickly, allowing your salespeople to actually sell, but then going further down the line. So our focus right now in 2025 is the pre-construction side. But when I say become the Procore for subs also need a platform to do their submittals, to do their change orders, to do their purchase orders, to do their project schedules, to do their closeouts. That's where Jengai is going to be. We want them to have a platform that allows them to grow their business as big as it should be.
I have a appreciation for that because, again, like I think sometimes technology solves a piece of the process, and I get that, right? Hey, there has to be some kind of systematic way to building a piece of technology, right? You have to start with that MVP, but I do think that sometimes a lot of tech founders forget, like to look at the process holistically and say, okay,
Right.
really, how is this user going to manage a project and really have a great client experience for their clients throughout the project? And what's that whole process really look like there? Now, I'm also, I want to go a little off script here because I would imagine that there's also some mindset shifts that have to happen
Mm.
for some people to properly adopt what you're building and also to kind of get through that bell curve that you mentioned. And so it's not just about, hey, we have to have some kind of system for our sales, but also if we're going to de-risk, they have to be open to systematizing other parts of their business. And so with the customers that you've had so far with Jengai, have you noticed like, oh, yeah, like they could definitely use this piece of technology, but there's also some mindset shifts or some strategy that has to happen elsewhere in the business?
I'll tell you the pattern that's emerged, especially the more successful companies. What's emerged is they developed a process, let's say 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and maybe small parts of it have evolved. And it's a great process. You know, someone sat down and they were very systematic about how should this work. But then what's ended up happening is over the course of that next 10, 15 years, they haven't evolved that process very much. They haven't, continuously reinvented the process, mostly probably because it's hard. It's almost like a factory. A factory prepares the proposal. So salesperson gets an invitation to bid. They hand it over to the estimator. The estimator does the takeoff, hands it off to the salesperson. Sometimes they have someone doing material pricing or labor pricing. Salesperson prices, fires off the proposal. So when you have a people process in an organization, it's hard to change it. And what I have observed is these are big, well-run companies with very smart people at the helm, but they haven't reinvented these processes. So what ends up happening is their people waste time. Like we have a company right now that we're implementing at, and we deployed Jengai to this company. Within probably the first 2 weeks, their estimation team's performance went up by 30 or 35%. And
Wow.
we're implementing on the sales side right now. And I can see, based on my analyses, I'm sitting with one of their directors of sales, and I can see that their sales is going to be boosted by up to 50%. And it's all because obviously it's all of the tooling and the capabilities that Jengai brings is a massive lift. But mostly what we're doing with Jengai is looking for just remove all the efficiencies, use AI, use cool tools to solve problems we solve, and just streamline the entire process. So the short answer to your question for me would be the process was developed 15 years ago and just hasn't evolved. And
Mm,
15 years ago it was great, but it's not great for now. But that's why
yeah.
Jenga's here.
Hey now, right?
So it
Now
matters.
that's interesting because I mean, there are times where you could see how overcomplicated something is, or I mean, construction is it's a people business, right? And there's
100%.
going to be handoffs and there's going to be things that have to bounce between people and bounce between teams. But if you were to maybe like pull everyone into a room and just pretend like a notebook or something was project information and then
Right.
physically go hand it off to people and see how many times you have to move that one piece of information,
Just saying,
you can see
Samantha.
how, yeah, it's like, it's wow, this is way overcomplicated than it needs to be. How can we make it a straight line here? And the fact that you have the data to back up the worth of the piece of tech, and it's not like a flimsy piece of data either to say like, oh, our sales production is up 35%. That's a KPI that actually matters and is like the proof in the pudding for people to say, hell yeah, I want Jengai today. Now,
Absolutely.
I'm also curious because I have an appreciation for lessons learned and showing how things can sometimes be a little bit messy before we find the wonderful part of a solution. And so, were there moments in the early days of Jengai that you built something or maybe wanted to experiment with a feature and then realized, oh, this is not really what our subcontractors need?
No, I did something even worse. So
Okay.
I I never really appreciated the risks inside of construction. And my big idea, and I'm still hoping we'll get there, but probably in a in a more careful way. My big idea was, why do you even have to bid? Why don't you let Jengai do all the work for you? And then you literally just look at the numbers, and you're at the golf course, you look at the numbers and you go, cool, yeah, let's bid that. I like that number. So that was my original idea. And we started in stone and tile. So I'm not sure how much you know about that particular trade, but it's a tough trade. It's hard. It's very, very easy to lose money in that trade, especially stone, because you sell it in stone slabs, they're expensive. So the very first version of, it was called Gamut at the time, the very first version of Gamut that went live, we literally, so we use a lot of AI, but we also used people. And I was selling my customers fully priced bids. And my idea for them was, and part of my terms were, guys, please make sure that the numbers are good. And what ended up happening was a couple of companies literally just took our numbers and submitted them. And because I didn't realize how far off we could be, some of the proposals that they submitted were just way off. I mean, luckily not huge, because it can be tens of thousands. It's just a couple of thousand off. We'd already said, please don't use our number. But the second I realized that, Samantha, that level of risk, I just rolled back that whole service, and we just, started doing something different. So I think just as a function of not understanding the risk, I try to do too much with Jenga straight out the gates, and too much too quickly, and put some of my customers at risk. So what would I tell myself if I was to go back in time and start again? I think I'd probably tell myself, don't do construction, Shayne, because it's too hard. But then the flip side of that is, I keep saying it's an exciting time. I think you and I are going to see some pretty amazing things happen over the course of the next couple of years, because technology has finally caught up to being able to solve the problems that construction companies have. So that's what's super exciting. I probably got into it a little early, but the space is so dense. It's so hard to learn construction. It's so there's so much to the business that it literally took me this long just to have a very small or the small understanding that I do now. So having said that, I would tell myself not to do it. I'd probably also tell myself to do it. You know what I mean? I know that sounds
I
weird.
think a lot of us feel that way. There are times even when in my own business, I'm like, why did I choose to go down this route? But that's interesting. So you're saying it took you kind of 7 years-ish to feel just somewhat confident. Now, I think that there's some value in not always having just industry people building things for the industry. Obviously, those people are going to have the best insights into what certain companies and types of companies are going to need, but there's also value and versatility of thought there. And so you have such a diverse background. Were there, I guess I'm curious as to like what lessons you learned in other parts of your career that you were able to apply to just the construction space in general, or specifically construction tech.
Being a technologist for such a long time, it means that I'm just always thinking about how can technology make things better. I don't know if that necessarily is what I've brought to construction from. I would say it's more from the technology perspective. If there's a way to make something faster, you should use technology. People's time is the most precious commodity that you have. The expertise that they bring, and if you're forcing them to copy and paste and move the same information around continuously, you're not using them in the best possible way. So just efficiency. That's probably the biggest thing. I actually think that I've learned more from this sector than than I've brought in some ways. I've met some incredibly smart people, hardworking, who think very critically about their businesses and been inspired. So yeah, I think I've learned more than have brought to construction.
Could you share one of those like, oh, wow moments where you're sitting down with someone, whether it's market research or helping to implement with a customer, that you just got really inspired by something they did or said?
So we're members of a trade organization called StarNet.
Mhm.
And StarNet, you meet the people who started these companies. And I started in investment banking. So I had this idea of what a person who runs a subcontracting business is, mostly from doing residential projects in my own home, you know? So there's a guy, I don't want to mention his name, but he started out, he built his company, became one of the biggest flooring companies in the area he was in the metro he was in. And then that company was purchased by a private equity company. And then he worked inside of that sort of bigger roller of the flooring company. And just, some of the insights and the way that he thinks about or thought about and described his business. And then he'll expands it out into the, at 50,000 feet, a lot of businesses look the same, or 100,000 feet. At some point, the business becomes about the business. So just the way that he shared how his experience from being the owner operator in a company that he built from nothing, to selling that company to a private equity backed roll up, to thinking about how do I make this big, massive company a success from the perspective of the organizational design, and how do I build the components of this massive company so that it can be as successful as a small company. I found that very inspiring, like just great conversations with very smart, focused people.
Yeah, I mean, the industry is full of extremely caring, well-intentioned, intelligent people, and
Mm.
it's part of why I have this podcast, right? Is to bring some of those stories to light of like, this is an awesome industry, and how cool for you to be able to just kind of get pulled into it by a
Excellent.
friend that needed some help. And now you get to meet all these amazing people. If we went back to the origin story here, how is that stone and tile friend doing? And I'm going to assume that they implemented Jengai, but
Oh,
how have they been
yes.
doing since 2018?
They have doubled their top line and tripled their profits. So not just because of Jenga, they've made some very smart
Mhm.
decisions. But I like to think that Jenga allowed them to work more on the business and less in the business. Earlier we were talking about how if you handed a notebook around, or a little note around the information that's moved, people would be shocked at how often the same information gets copied. But very few companies get the chance to do that, you know? So I think that Jengai helped them to do that, and it helps all of its customers to do that. And the effect of that, beyond just the immediate benefits that they get, is when you can look at your business from a 50,000 foot view, you can start to think about the things that could work a little better. And I think that's what
Mm.
Jengai brought to the table for them, and that's what it brings for other customers.
I'm feeling the reminder for myself because I always say I'm the cobbler's kids with no shoes. I
Right.
am so good at helping other people get organized, but with myself, I tell people all the time, like, you need a CEO day. You need a day that you're just focused on those 50,000 foot big things in the business, and I rarely do that for myself. And so I'm feeling a little like, oh crap, Sam, take your own medicine, you know. But no, that's awesome. I think also, sometimes we get overwhelmed when we think of technology, right? Like, especially sometimes for me, I'm like, I just want one or two things that are going to solve like this entire process. And we forget that, okay, if we can alleviate some pain points in just part of the process, or if we could just get this one part of the business moving smoothly, then that frees us up to make the other parts of the business run smoother and to be more strategic and more creative. And it sounds like Jengai was really that kind of catalyst for that friend.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Absolutely.
Yeah, you just need that spark. You just need a catalyst to then get you a little bit out of the weeds and a little bit out of chaos and not pulling
100%.
all your hair out.
Yeah.
And then, okay, cool, we can go do these things. Okay, so I think you said for 2025, your big focus was pre-construction. What is on the feature deck next for Jengai? What does 2026 really look like for you guys?
We focused super hard on pre-construction, and I mentioned some of the gains that our customers are getting. Next step is going to be post-win. So we want to be able to give people a way to build their project schedules, a way to do change orders, a way to do purchase orders. So essentially we wanted to start right at the beginning. So the beginning, the inception point is invitation to bid, into estimation, into proposals, and we're just going to walk our way up the chain, basically. So next step is going to be post-win functionality. And there's huge
Cool.
opportunity there too.
There's also a lot more hair pulling moments and why did
Ab-
I do this
Absolutely.
moments awaiting you. But I'm very excited to see what
Yeah.
solutions you guys come up with.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay, my last piece here, I always like to leave listeners with a piece of advice. And so this could be technology related, this could be specifically for subcontractors or just in general if you're, have that business entrepreneur mind. So, if we've talked a little bit about really looking at the business from a big picture perspective, we've looked at, hey, like, are you not adopting, or is it that you're not tech savvy? How many projects away from bankruptcy are you? Right? Like just knowing all those things in the business and also being able to really focus on sales. But if you were to give a business owner just one piece of advice of like, hey, just start here. If you're feeling a little lost or things are getting kind of overwhelmed, start here. What would that piece of advice be?
That piece of advice would be you generally know which parts of your business are challenging. You know they're challenging generally because it's hard for you to put people in roles that service that particular function. If you have a role like that, then you should have a look at some technology that's going to help you with that. For example, I mentioned that we started at the beginning, but I know that for a lot of construction companies, hiring an estimator is hard. Hiring a salesperson is hard. It can take years to develop someone into someone that you can trust will get good pricing. And one company told me it takes them 3 years from the day they hire a salesperson to the day that they will let them bid every type of project. So my focus area is pre-construction, but there are places in your business, and that's typically how the issues manifest. And if there's an issue there, look around for a piece of technology. If you're a successful company, you probably did implement something 10, 15 years ago, but take a good look at it again and think of technology as a way to grow your business. The other thing you need to know is that your competitors are looking at technology. Everyone's looking at technology. We have to leverage all of the knobs and dials that we have. And that generally means constantly reinventing the processes that drive our business.
Mm. That is, first of all, looking at technology as this is a tool to grow your business. Almost treat it like an employee, right? Like you're going to
Yes.
pay a salary or the subscription cost. And what's the ROI or the job description that this piece of technology needs to fulfill? But also the fact about remembering that your competitors are doing it. And I think we're moving past the phase in the market where you can just say, "Oh, we're different because we care or because we listen." Like
Right.
that is becoming very jaded marketing and sales language. And now you have to back that up with not only do you produce high quality work, but you can get it done in a timely manner, or you have the other parts of your business together. You've got your shit together in some way, or you're not a hot
Absolutely.
mess back here. That now is going to be your competitive advantage. And if you're not using technology, you're going to be left behind. That's what I'm hearing from you as well there.
100%. 100%. At some point when you're a good company, you're not competing with bad companies. You're competing with other good companies. That's why you just have to continuously innovate.
Mhm.
Otherwise, they say all ships rise with the rising tide. I think what's going to happen over the next couple of years is there are going to be early adopters of technology, and their businesses are going to bloom. There are going to be people that eventually come to the table, maybe 3 years later, where they've revenue-wise, they've been beaten up by their competitors, and then eventually they'll jump on the bandwagon, and then there'll be the guys that don't, and there's a good chance they won't be around, because one of the side effects of technology is competition. It just becomes harder and harder, no matter what your business is. So I guess that's the theme of the way I think about it. Think of technology as an enabler and lean into it. Take advantage. It's really going to elevate your business.
Yeah, which is a humble but also realistic approach that we've got to take in business.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Shayne, for joining us today. This was an amazing conversation. I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you for your time, Samantha. It was such a nice podcast. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.